Thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. I want to thank everyone for their patience and appreciate you joining us today. So this is the first in a series that we're putting on together focused on education during the pandemic. And I know that all of us these are strange and unusual times and a real challenge, particularly those of you who are educators and those of you who are parents or both, figuring out how to support kids and to make sure that we don't allow this period of quarantine to deny kids the access to an education. So I want to first of all thank CAAASA for joining me in this work and thank all of you for taking some time out of your day to participate. There is a survey we'd like you to fill out at the end to get your feedback and on the information that we presented. This is a series. There'll be a number of other webinars coming up and you'll get see our schedule for those. So I want to start as the opening speaker to the series, just again reminding us these are not usual times, and therefore education can't look the way it did before. So just to remind us about some of the challenges that we're facing. Right now, we know there are lots of kids out there with limited access to virtual learning. In LA alone, I live in Los Angeles, 25% of kids don't have access to the internet at home, don't have access to screens. In some communities, there was a report today released from USC, showed that in some communities like Watts and Compton, it's 50% of the kids. So this is a huge challenge with respect to just access. We know on top of that, there are lots of kids who don't get enough support at home, either because their parents are working at themselves or their parents are not working and are stressed out because of the economic uncertainty, which means the kids are left on their own to figure out how to navigate the technology, whether or not they're logging in at all is sometimes up to them. And if they run into challenges with the work, there may not be anyone to help them. Additionally, there's limited guidance to teachers on how to serve kids through distance learning, through the use of technology. And particularly, this is an issue for those who serve vulnerable kids, kids with special needs, kids who are English learners, kids who were not being well served before. Chances are they're going to be even facing greater challenges during this period. And then I think there's, because this happened so quickly, before any of us could prepare, we just haven't been able to provide the guidance to educators they need to make the learning that occurs online meaningful. And this is important because if it's not meaningful, if it's not something that kids want to do, there are a lot of kids that simply won't. Because it's really on the child to decide in many cases if they are going to engage, if they are going to apply themselves and take it seriously. And so this is a huge challenge that is very different from what we've known in traditional schools. On top of that, there's the economic uncertainty of the moment. Many families not working, many families struggling with getting their basic needs met. There's the fear related to the virus itself. And as we know, it's had a disproportionate impact on African Americans across the country right now with death rates way far exceeding the percentage of the population. There's a lot of housing instability, which was there before, but even more so now because people can't pay rent, can't pay mortgages, bear risk and risk losing their homes. And then all of this is made that much more difficult because lots of people don't have adequate health care. And so if they're sick, are afraid to go in because they're not sure if they'll be treated or how they'll pay for it. And that is contributing to the challenges we're facing at this moment. So I named these challenges because these are in fact equity challenges right now. They are of a different nature than what we typically face in education, but they're nonetheless real, and that's what we've got to contend with if we're going to make education work during this period. So we've got to start by drawing upon what we know about youth development and student learning. And I want you to just note how I'm connecting the two. That is that we know that developmental needs of a child affect academic performance. We've known that for a long time, but I would say in the last several years, we've focused narrowly on achievement and have ignored those developmental needs. And that's one of the reasons why it tends to be that the kids with the greatest needs have done the least well in school. We can't afford to do that now. Right now, we need a holistic approach to address the needs of our kids and to improve and sustain academic support. So that means we have to acknowledge that young people learn through relationships. What we already know is that the kids who were going to schools where they had strong, positive relationships with their teachers are going to be in a much better position to learn during this period than those who went to schools where the relationships were strained or non-existent. Kids learn through relationships, and the adults who they trust, the adults who they know care about them, will be adults they turn to for advice and support and to learn from during this period. We also know that that the kids who were had the greatest needs before are going to be the most likely to be marginalized now, and therefore we're going to have to do more to reach those kids because they're not going to simply be able to support their education through traditional means. There is an additional concern here that we have too much screen time for kids and not enough physical activity, and we know that this is not good for kids. And so it does concern me that kids are on playing video games, that they're on YouTube and TikTok and other platforms, and then we put that on top of the learning time. That means that they're sitting in their chairs and in front of a screen for much too much time. So point I'll come back to in a moment, we've got to make sure there's time in there for breaks, for physical activity. We want kids to eat and have healthy meals. We've got to think about their overall development. And then finally, we know that stress related to fear and uncertainty of the moment is high, which is another reason why we're going to have to be attentive to the mental health of kids during this period as well, and their parents. So we've known this for a while, but we, I think, have not sufficiently acknowledged that schools can't do this alone. We do need the support of families, especially right now, parents working with us as our partners. We need the support of other agencies, health workers, social workers, after-school programs, especially in the hard-to-reach communities, because if we expect teachers to do this by themselves, they themselves will be overwhelmed. Many teachers are parents also, so they're juggling with trying to do their job and support their children during this period. There have been lots of people in key policy missions who ignored that in the past. And I just have a quote here from 3 of them who would like us to believe that schools and educators alone can do this work. Well, we have ample evidence that that doesn't work. And so part of what we've got to do is to take a step back, understand the moment we're in, and start to approach this with a fresh set of eyes and a fresh perspective on how to do this work. So just in the last few years, we became aware of how toxic stress impacts learning. We call this trauma. It takes lots of different forms. We know that it has an impact on attention. And many of you are seeing that now with kids who simply cannot plug in for very long on Zoom. So that's got to affect how long a period we expect them to engage in lessons. We know it affects memory. And if we expect kids to retain things, we've got to make sure that we're not overwhelming them with content. So we have to be real clear, what is the most important part of what we're teaching for kids to retain? And we know it has an impact on inhibitory control. That is the ability of kids to control their impulses, to sit still and maintain attention during a lesson, to not be distracted by what might be happening around them. This is going to be even greater challenge now than it is during the typical school day. So there's a lot of evidence that the stresses associated with poverty in particular produce wear and tear on the cardiovascular system, and that it results in an impact on the brain and the ability of the kind of the executive functioning of the brain. I bring this up now because we have to understand that this is not a typical moment. And it means that strategies we've used in the past may not work now because of the circumstances our kids and their families are in. So many of you may be familiar with this chart. If you're not, you can take a look at it from the CAAASA website at the University of Illinois. CAAASA is the Center for Social and Emotional Learning. And what it does is it reminds us that social and emotional learning is a critical part of academic learning. Those of you who've read Paul Tuff's work, Helping Children to Succeed, know that the attributes that we develop with our kids, such as self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness, all are strong predictors of academic success. Now, if we were in a traditional classroom, we'd have to teach these explicitly. We've got to make sure that in this home distance learning format, we are still working to develop these kinds of skills in kids now, because they do have an impact on academic learning as well.
Noguera, sorry to interrupt. We're not able to see your slides, and you mentioned some charts. I just want to make sure that.
Wow, I thought for sure I was sharing my slides. So you're not.
At the bottom, we're seeing your face, but we're not seeing anything on your screen.
Oh boy. Okay. So can you see my home screen?
No.
Huh.
We see your video camera.
It says that I'm sharing, and so you're not seeing my desktop?
Yeah, it's starting now. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Thank you so much.
All right. I'm sorry about that. I thought I was showing you all this time. Apologize for that. So I'll quickly scroll through, and you'll get a copy of these later to have for you. And I think I left off right here. So part of what we want to do as educators is help to establish conditions. Now, we can't control what's happening in the home, but we can do things like check in at the beginning of a lesson. How are you doing? How are you feeling today? To let the kids know that we are concerned about their safety. We're concerned about what's happening with them. That's a key part of building relationship. We want to make sure that the learning that we ask them to engage in is challenging. Not challenging in terms of the amount of work, but something that stimulates them, something that provokes their attention, that gets them to think deeply. This is important because, again, we're competing with lots of distractions around them. A lot of kids are playing video games if they have them, or they're in homes where there are lots of other people around. So what we're doing must be compelling, must be interesting. It really is essential that we try to be as creative as possible during this period. Again, we want to work on the relationships, the connections with them, and we do that by developing ours and their social and emotional competence. So many of you have seen this chart before that tries to make the distinction between equity and equality. We know that treating everybody the same is in many ways the cruelest form of equality, because we know all kids are not the same. At the same time, we also know there are lots of kids out there who are very privileged, and we're seeing this right now. My daughter, for example, has 2 college-educated parents at home who can help her, and we're challenged by doing that work while we also work. Well, there are also lots of kids out there who don't have that kind of support at home, and who are faced with the other challenges I mentioned earlier related to the economic insecurity. And that's why the work we've got to do is to try to address these barriers that I named already. By eliminating the barriers to learning, we're going to reduce the likelihood that this period of quarantine will exacerbate the inequity that already was present prior to the pandemic. So our goals during the pandemic has to be, first of all, to make learning meaningful and relevant. This means we've really got to spend time thinking about what we're teaching and how to connect it to kids. Now, again, these are things we should have been doing long ago. Cultural relevance is, I think, essential part of any education. But when you're in a traditional school and you can rely on compliance to get kids to do things, you may not feel as though the need for this is great. Right now, it's essential. If we don't find ways to make the work we're doing meaningful to kids, they'll simply tune out and not participate. Relationships have to be central. And again, when kids trust us, when they know we care about them, they're going to be more willing to work with us and to not give up when things get hard. And that's something we've really got to be concerned about. And then we've got to maintain that holistic focus on the social, emotional, the mental health, as well as the academic support kids need. So whenever possible, we've got to make learning active. And by that, I mean, we've got to get kids doing things as part of their learning, whether it be conducting experiments, doing some writing, some independent learning. We've got to get this, because if we don't, the passive learning is likely to lead to boredom and disengagement. And so again, it calls on us to be as creative as possible and think about how do we make the learning active so it can be more meaningful and engaging to our students. Whenever possible, we can make it collaborative. We can get kids working on projects together in between our meetings. The kids love interaction. You know, watching my own daughter, I'm struck by when they have Zoom meetings, the kids are just looking at each other, they're not looking to the teacher because they miss their classmates, they miss their friends. So that's an opportunity then to get kids to work together on projects in between meetings so that they can have a chance to interact, but also have a chance to learn together. And there's a lot of research shows that when kids learn together, the learning is much more likely to stick and to result in retention of key ideas and skills. It's got to be learning that develops those higher order thinking skills. By that, I mean the critical thinking, the problem solving, the ability to analyze information, to do research independently. These are the things that really help our kids to be able to advance in their education, be able to move beyond simply memorization. These are the kinds of attributes they need to actually be prepared for college. So when we prepare lessons, we should ask ourselves, are we focused on the higher order skills, or are they still stuck around factual memorization? That's the kind of work that's least likely to keep kids engaged. And then finally, we want learning that supports mastery. Mastery of skill development, mastery of development of what they know. And so whenever possible, we should give kids a chance to share what they've learned with their peers. We should ask them to produce things, whether it be written work or things they do online. My daughter, sorry to use my daughter as an example, but she's working on a podcast now that she's sharing with her classmates. It's a great way to engage technology as a creator, not simply as a consumer. And so I want to encourage all the educators out there to think about how do we get my kids to tap into their creative impulses so that they're not simply engaged in passive learning. So let me give an example of a school that's doing this work. And this is a school I've had a long relationship with, Social Justice Humanitas, based in Pacoima out in the San Fernando Valley. It's a school that really gets outstanding results despite the fact that these kids are all low income, most of them English learners, or come from homes where the parents don't speak English. And that's because before the pandemic, they were doing things like community building. They had collective decision-making amongst the staff. It wasn't just what the principal decided. They were building partnerships with community-based organizations. So teachers didn't have to be social workers and psychologists. They have teachers who are empowered to work together and plan lessons together. It's the only high school in Los Angeles where kids evaluate the teachers, and the evaluation is taken seriously as a way to give teachers feedback on their performance. And as a result of these strategies, they have the 4th highest graduation rate in Los Angeles, and 95% of the kids go on to college. I also like to point out they haven't had a fight in over 6 years too. So I want to now share what they're doing now during the pandemic, because I think it can serve as a guide of what's possible for us. So just before school closed, they surveyed all the students to find out what their technological needs were. That's something we can do right now to find out who has and who doesn't. And if you can't do it through email or through the internet, then we got to call and find out how to reach whether or not our kids even have access. This allowed them to figure out which kids need to be targeted with screens and get hotspots to them so that they have a chance to learn during this period. They also wanted to document the needs of kids and their families so that they could also let them know where help is needed for food and where they can get help with paying bills and getting health care if they need it. Again, a lot of families are cut off from these resources and don't know where to go. we can be that bridge to the support they need. They're currently developing support committees to provide individualized responses to kids in need. Again, really important because, as we know, part of equity is recognizing the different needs of kids, that they're not all the same. So we have to really know who they are, know what their needs are. They're doing specifically targeted outreach to the families of English learners, because they know that many of them, because of the language barriers, don't know what kinds of resources are available. And then they make sure that all kids have the support in terms of the technology at home, and they have grade level meetings where they discuss what kinds of additional supports may be needed. In addition, they're supporting their teachers, and they're doing that beyond what LAUSD requires. They're making sure that teachers, they're checking in with them about their own social, emotional, and mental health needs. They're making sure that they understand how to humanize teaching, which really means, again, building that connection with kids, so that the kids know we actually care about them. We all know that kids respond differently and better usually when they know we care. They have weekly faculty meetings, and they're doing trainings with teachers on how to do their advisories online in ways that allow them to maintain strong ties to their kids. Finally, they have grade level meetings, particularly for the 9th and 10th graders. They're giving teachers a chance to work on different social emotional learning strategies with their teachers. This includes everything from cooking and meditation to yoga and a book club. Again, it's not good enough to get kids working. We want to make learning fun for kids during this period. They're also helping 9th and 10th graders to develop a schedule, because it's so important that kids have some structure in their lives now, that they not be waking up at 10, 11 o'clock in the morning and staying up until late at night, because that's going to make it very hard for them to engage in any learning with that kind of unstructured lifestyle. They have women's and male support groups to address their particular needs. And then they are also come up with fun activities that kids can do at home, escape rooms, solving puzzles, working as teams to complete challenges, all of it to make learning more interactive and to make it more fun. So I share these from a particular school because I think these are good ideas that we can borrow from, and we need to borrow readily from good ideas that are working out there and draw upon them in our own work to help us do this work more effectively. In addition to supporting our kids in these ways, we want to find ways to make social and emotional learning integrated into the academic core of what we do. As I said earlier, social emotional learning includes things like impulse control, which is a real challenge now because kids are not in the classroom, so you can't tell them to get back in their seats. So we need to talk explicitly about what's called for, what are the norms of learning during this period. We need to teach them how to defer gratification. Kids might say, you know, I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm bored, I want to get up and go outside. Learning to defer gratification, put in the time first, play later, work now, play later, is a great motto. And getting our kids to learn that, I think, will be really essential, not just now, but after this pandemic and quarantine is over. Learning empathy, building that into our lessons so the kids understand that, you know, there are lots of people out there who are experiencing hardships, some of them suffering, and being able to identify with others is such an important attribute because it helps kids to understand that they have a responsibility for what they learn to others, starting with their families, but extending beyond their families to the community, to the society we live in, to the world. And so I want you to think about, how do you build empathy into your lessons? And how do you help kids learn how to develop positive relationships with others, their peers, their parents, and others? And then we need to design activities that are specifically aimed at teaching social and emotional learning. And I'll give an example of a lesson I just saw recently being done at an elementary school where kids were reading together. They were reading from a book from Harry Potter, and then together they were in their chat room discussing what it's like to be an orphan and why Harry was being treated as he was by his uncle and their family, and what it's like to be in a situation like that. And what it did was it opened up for kids the opportunity to talk about what's happening in their lives, the opportunity to imagine what it's like to be in a situation like that. And that is, again, an important part of their development as young people. And so in addition to developing their literacy skills, they're also developing those social and emotional skills. And that's why broadening our definitions of success is so critical right now. We can't, there's a lot of discussion right now about grading and how we should evaluate kids during this period. I think what the first step is to make sure that they are participating and getting them, enticing them to participate. And then beyond that, we need to make sure that we're giving them feedback on what they do, the work they produce, because the feedback is far more important than the grade. Helping kids to understand where they could improve, what they could do better, is a critical part of learning and a critical part of the learning relationship. So we have to think differently about what it means to be successful during this period. Success is not simply about getting good grades. Success is about participating. It's about helping others. And it's about pushing yourself to do your very best. And if we can get kids plugged in to do those things, again, it'll have an impact long after the pandemic is over. And so for all those reasons, we have to constantly check in with kids. I'm teaching university students now at UCLA, and I start each class by asking them, how are you doing? Talk to us about how it's going. I know some people are not leaving their homes at all, and this is having an impact on their mental health. Some people are not eating regularly. All of this, we need to check in, find out how they're doing, and let them know where help is available. So this is a critical part of the work we do now as educators, and I want to encourage you to think about how you can support it, and whether you're doing work with small children or adolescents. So the research on resilience, which we need to tap into now, is really important. Resilience, as we know, is not the same as grit. There are a lot of people have been talking about the importance of working hard. Angela Duckworth, psychologist at University of Pennsylvania, wrote a lot and won a MacArthur Genius Award for her work on grit. Grit is important, but not sufficient. What we want to do is promote resilience in kids, the ability to get up after you've been knocked down, to not give up. But you don't promote resilience unless you build those relationships, right, with kids. The check-in is so important. Being willing to listen to them and hear what's happening in their lives and getting their peers to listen to each other is so essential. The research is very clear that when kids become more resilient through greater social and emotional awareness, they're going to be better able to overcome obstacles in their lives. And so I want to encourage you to use this period as an opportunity to develop those kinds of skills in kids. Again, there are many who I think have confused grit with agency. And again, I don't want to negate the value of grit. It is important for kids to learn to work hard. And we want to encourage that during this period. We want to also get kids to not give up so easily. But at the same time, we also want kids to think critically. And that's where agency is different. Agency starts with critical thinking. It also acknowledges the barriers and obstacles kids face. And it calls on us to strategize about how to overcome those obstacles rather than simply ignore them. And agency can be collective, and meaning that we can work together as a community with our students, with their parents, to address the obstacles they face. So I encourage you to think of your classrooms, your schools as communities that can work together during this period to solve problems. We don't have to treat it as though we're all by ourselves. And that knowledge that I'm not all alone can be a source of comfort to many people. I hope if at any point I'm triggering a question, you can use the chat room. I'm going to stop in a few minutes to check in and take some questions so we can elaborate further on some of the themes that I've raised today. So what we need is a holistic vision. We've needed this before, but we really need it now. We want teaching and learning to be central to our work as educators, but we also want to look at ways we get learning to be extended. This is an excellent time now for independent reading. Just imagine what would happen if kids during this quarantine were reading on their own, had great books that got them to want to read at night, so that instead of being in front of a screen and not being able to go to sleep, they were reading books, and they were coming back to you asking for more. So this is a great time for developing independent reading as a skill and a love in our kids. If you want a great resource, I would recommend two sites. The American Reading Company has a great collection of books for boys in particular that I've recommended. And Lee and Low Books, L-E-E, Low and Low Books, has the greatest collection of multicultural literature in the country. I'd encourage you to take a look at both sites for books and recommend them to your school and to your families. Our vision has to include safety and mentorship, and we need to let the kids know that if they feel unsafe for any reason, they should let you know. This period we're already finding out, comes with great risk to kids who are in unsafe environments, and our kids need to know that we care about their well-being as well, and we need to make that known to them explicitly. We need to figure out who can be our partners in this work. If families need food, where can they turn? And if they need help in other areas, help is there. Mayor Garcetti, for those of you who live in the LA area, has put out a message each evening about the latest developments. Governor Newsom has done the same thing each day, I believe around 11 a.m. That's a great way. You can also check the websites of the State Department of Education for the latest information about education during this period. So we need to keep informed and make sure that we are utilizing the resources that are available to us. In many ways, this is an excellent opportunity to get families and parents more involved than ever before. And I realize I say that knowing it's a challenge. And I know that as a parent myself, it's a challenge when you're working yourself to also be involved with your kids. But our kids need us. And if they know that we are concerned, if they know that we are interested in what they're doing, they're going to be more likely to get involved. It will help them with their motivation. It'll help our relationship with them. So I want to encourage you to, when you talk to parents out there, and if there are parents listening, use this as a chance to bond with your child. Let them see you working too, so that they know that even though we're at home, it doesn't mean that the work stops. And then finally, we got to pay attention to health and nutrition. If anything, this pandemic has reminded us that we've got to stay healthy. We've got to eat well. We've got to exercise. Best way to avoid lapsing into real serious sickness is to take care of ourselves now. Hopefully none of us will catch this virus, but if we do, we want to recover quickly. So here are some resources I want to recommend. The New York Times yesterday in their Sunday Journal had a special supplement called Pandemic Parenting. Excellent set of guides in there for parents and educators on how to support kids during this period. Things like mindfulness for parents. So if you're experiencing stress, the importance of meditation, activities for kids to keep kids busy and keep kids learning and making learning fun. And I particularly like the advice for parents about eating. I've been struggling with my daughter about eating more vegetables during this period. They said, well, okay, give kids a break. Sometimes comfort food is okay, as long as not too much junk food. So I recommend this as a resource. You can get it online. Go to New York Times Pandemic Parenting, and you'll find it there. There's another one I saw called Staying Engaged During the Coronavirus Quarantine. This document is also available on my Facebook page. You can go to Pedro and Noguera, PhD, and you can find this one there. It's excellent advice about how to work with kids during this period. Same thing with the following document, Supporting Online Learning. For many of us, this is a new way of teaching and learning. I'm still getting good at it. CAAASA's getting good at it. The technical challenges are not insignificant, but we can do this and we can make it work. We don't have to give in, and there are guides and supports there. One of the places where we can turn to for help is from those who've been doing homeschooling. As we know, there are thousands of parents across the country that have been doing homeschooling for years, and some of them done it quite well. And there was a great interview with a homeschooling expert last week at EdSource, which you can find, about how to do this well and how to get the right balance. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. And then finally, some tips about the mental health challenges we're facing and how to avoid lapsing into depression or increased anxiety during this period, because that threat is real too. And so if you look again on my page, you'll see some good tips from mental health experts about how to cope with your mental health and wellness during this period. So let me pause to check on the chat room to see if there's anyone there that would like to pose a question. And let me see, where's the chat? Is anybody would like to pose a question now that check in? You could write your questions in the chat too. And maybe the host, can you help us and see if there are any questions in the chat room that you want to pose to me?
I will, Dr. Noguera. You can maybe pause sharing your screen so that you can also see the chat. At the bottom, there should be a stop share button somewhere.
Okay. Oh, I see. There it is. Pause share. Okay. And so where do I see the chats now?
And there's the button for chat where the share screen is. We have several people asking if you will be able to share the slides after the presentation.
Yes, I will share the slides. They will be on the CAAASA website, and they'll be available for you there.
Do you see the questions now? We have one question about whether the American Reading Company and Lee and Low offer free online books for students.
I can't say they do, but it's worth asking. And you know, so unfortunately, I can't guarantee they will make it free. But perhaps our schools can use some of their resources to purchase books from them. Those are books that kids should have anyway. So, but I don't believe they're free. I know they're private companies.
We have another question about, I'm familiar with Duckworth's work on grit. Can you share leading authors and the concept of agency?
Yeah, so I wrote a book with my colleagues Julio Camarota and Sean Ginwright a few years ago on youth resistance, in which we talk extensively about the concept of agency and give real concrete examples of it. Wayne Yang, a professor at UC San Diego, has also written extensively about youth agency. Youth agency really gets at, again, critical thinking. It's about again, not denying the obstacles kids face. It's strategizing with them about how to confront those obstacles. So if you write to me, my email address is pnoguera@gseis.ucla.edu. You can just go to UCLA, Google me, and you'll see it come up. Send me an email. I'll be happy to send more resources. Can you tell me, where do I see the chat room?
In the bottom of the screen, there should be a chat button with a little bubble on it. But first of all, if you could click stop sharing the screen, your screen is still sharing, and I believe that's preventing you.
How do I stop share? Oh, there it is, stop
There
share.
you go.
Oh, okay, there we go, thank you.
Now, do you see the chat button?
Now I see the chat button. Thank you.
Wonderful.
All right, so I'm just looking. Okay, so how should sites proceed with social emotional support when students return back to school? Well, that's a really important question. And I'm hoping that if anything, this period has really made it clear to us that social emotional learning's got to be integral and central to what we do, not an add-on. I think the main thing, and again, the school I mentioned before, Social Justice Humanitas High School, they do it extremely well. They use the first 3 days of school just to do community building, where kids get a chance to know each other, get a chance to know the staff. I asked the principal, I said, well, are you worried about kids missing a school day? They said, no, we do it before school officially starts. I said, well, how do you get kids to come? He said, well, we just tell them they have to come and they show up. And because they show up, we learn about our kids and kids will tell us things that are important. So there are ways in which we can build community. And this, I think, is going to be particularly important when we return to school, because we're all going to be, I think, challenged by making the adjustment. I see another says, currently I'm having students create a documentary film via iPhone about their experiences dealing with this pandemic, and they are filmmakers, but I don't have a lot of student participation. I provided assistance and resources, but still not a lot of participation. Any suggestions? You know, that's a great idea. I would encourage you to give kids a chance to share with their classmates what they've done. It might be by seeing their peers what they've done that they'll be motivated and inspired. It's worked like that with my daughter in her class. When she shared her podcast, suddenly there are several podcasts coming up in the classroom because other kids were inspired by it. So a lot of times kids will be motivated by seeing what their peers do. Another question was, real parent engagement can happen during this time. What suggestions are you giving schools about parent engagement? So this is, I think, really great. And it's one of the, hopefully, the upsides of this period that we're in that could come out of it. I think we have to give guidance to parents about what they can do. And here, the main thing is checking in with their children, asking them about the work they're doing in class. What my wife and I have found to be helpful is actually sitting next to my daughter while she's doing her online distance learning when we can. So we know that she's staying engaged and participating, but also we know what she's getting. So then when we work with her individually, we know what the teachers have asked her to do. Now, it's not always feasible, especially if you have a job that doesn't allow for it. But whenever you can, I would say, find out what your children are being asked to do so that you can reinforce it at home. Graphic novels, someone mentions, a great way, especially for kids who are reluctant readers. It's a great way to get kids hooked into reading. A lot of times the pictures do it, and there are a lot of great books out there. My daughter just finished reading a book called Sisters, and she's a big consumer of graphic novels, and they have them for all ages, all the way up through high school. So I would really encourage you to look at, and that many of them are culturally relevant too. Great way to learn history, science, but also about relationships. So graphic novels, I never was exposed to them as a child, but I see them and I do appreciate them as a form of literature now. Question about resource recommendations for parents and students with disabilities on motivation, engagement, particularly for students with cognitive or attention issues. So I have seen some, one of the resources I mentioned earlier has some more details about working with kids with learning disabilities, particularly related to attention, maintaining attention. I'd encourage you to check those out when this session is over. So question was, what advice would you give school and district administrators who are particularly concerned about equity for African-American students in this context? This is, again, a big issue because, as we know, many schools across the state of California and the country were struggling with African-American students prior to the pandemic. And in all likelihood, that those challenges will persist and if not become even more severe. Again, I think it's going to come down to relationships. We've got to work hard. If the kids know that we care about them, if they trust us, they can be more likely to work with us during this period. So really taking the time to check in with them, ask them how they're doing. What have you been up to? What has been the hardest thing for you during this period? Listening to them as they share their experiences, all very important for building that relationship. I'd say all kids need that. I think our African-American kids need it even more because they are often alienated in school and the relationships they have with the adults are often strained. So really key to build those relationships now. I will add my contact, my email now that I know how to use the chat room, so that you can contact me, send me an email. So if you follow the chat room, and there will be other ways to engage after this is over. Let me close with some other thoughts about the possibility for engaging families without digital access. This is a huge challenge, obviously, and I want to give LA Unified a lot of credit for expanding access to it, for getting screens to kids, Chromebooks, and getting hotspots set up in communities where there are none. But I know that not all districts have the resources for that. I'm particularly concerned about rural communities where many homes don't have access. So I want to acknowledge it as a real problem. At the same time, those of you who know your communities, who know the kids you serve, know which kids are most likely to be cut off right now. And I would suggest that the district leaders, that you strategize together the best way to get support to those families. I was just in touch with a district in the Central Valley. They know their community. Many of the children they serve are from families that are farm workers, so the families are still working. They're letting kids know where they can get help, where they can pick up work, where they can get material, and where they can get hotspots set up. So a lot of this has to fall back on you. What do you know about your community, and the best way to reach them? And it may be that you have to go through other organizations like churches and nonprofits that know your community well to reach out to those families that are cut off because they don't have the internet connection. Let's see, I see another question about connecting with kids. It is not what we adults like to do and think it is best. It is really about knowing the kids and having a relationship with them and listening to them to get engaged. Very important that we listen. The problem is that too many adults get caught up trying to do their best and miss listening and connecting with kids. Very important. You know, you don't build a relationship through an interrogation by hammering a bunch of questions at kids. You really do have to create a space to listen to kids and to talk to them. So I want to really reinforce that point that we heard there. Let me, if I don't see any more questions, the session is being recorded. You'll be able to get it through the CAAASA website. There will also be, the slides will be there, the resources will be there. We're going to be producing a guide for educators as a result of this series that you'll also be made available to schools, districts, and to educators. So our goal is to not treat this as a one-off event, but really as a way to support you during this very challenging period. So let me close. My email address is there. I will put it in again. Someone just asked my email address. Here it is. But you can also Google me, and you'll find me on the UCLA site. So I heard this story the other day from some educators in a district not far from me. I won't name them, and they knew that there were families that were struggling with lack of access to Chromebooks, and so one of the teachers from the schools sent out a message to other teachers saying, look, how many have extra iBooks and iPads at home and that you can make available? I have friends that do. And just in a call to their own networks, they were able to collect over 50 screens. Because many of us, when we get a new iPad or a new device, we still have the old one around. And I would encourage you, we live in a rich country where lots of us have lots of things that we no longer use. Tap into those networks to make those available. Make them, try to draw on those resources. There's no reason why we can't make sure that kids can get the help they need during this period. Let me see if there are any other questions in the chat room that I missed. I thought they could all see my email. I'll share it again. P. Noguera at gseis.ucla.edu. Host, can you see any other questions that I may have missed? Host, are you still there?
I just shared the email with everyone again, just to be sure. Looking
Okay.
through some of the questions from earlier. And the presentation and the recording of the session will be posted later. Your contact information as well. Was one question earlier, how are you doing through all of this, and how do you best manage your self-care, being present for your students, your family, your community?
So that's a great question, and well, all of us are challenged in this period, myself included. On my Facebook page, Pedro Noguera, PhD, you can see I posted a list of mental health tips that I got from mental health workers. My wife's a psychologist, of things you can do to help you cope with this period of quarantine. For example, it's very important to have a structure to your day, not just walk around in your pajamas. And I know it's tempting, but having some structure, having time where you make time for exercise, where you make time for some social interaction, even if it's via Skype or Zoom or FaceTime, very important for your mental health. So there are lots of things we can do now to take care of ourselves. It's very hard to support our kids if we're not supporting ourselves as well. So self-care is not a luxury, it's an essential part of this work. Someone said, what are your thoughts on PBIS in the context of distance learning? That's a good question. I don't know if there's any, I don't know, I'm not sure about positive behavior support. I think we should talk to kids about their behavior at home. But obviously, we're gonna have to rely on our dialogue with kids to address any behavior challenges. We're not gonna be able to rely on the kind of sanctions we use while they're in school with us. So we're gonna be a lot more creative at how we work with kids and support them during this period. And I know there are teachers out there who have the experience on working with kids that I hope that you'll share some of your expertise too in how to do that work, keep kids engaged, keep them on task. So I think we're running out of time. Again, there's a survey we're asking you to fill out afterwards to give us some feedback on to address your needs and make sure that in future sessions, some of those can be addressed. We also have the resources from this session will be made available online through the CAAASA website. It's been recorded and videotaped. So if you want to look at it later, you can. I want to just conclude by saying that my hope is that this very difficult period that we're in will result in some of the major problems we face as a nation being addressed more than they have. Access to healthcare, access to educational opportunities. Our inequities now are on full display, and we cannot afford to return to the status quo. So I encourage all of you to be committed to doing what you can when this ends, to creating schools that are healthy, that are supportive, that are great places for teaching and learning, students and teachers. We can get through this, we will get through this, and we got to make sure that when we do, that we are better off. Thank you all, wish you the best. God bless.